The Philadelphia 76ers are in big trouble. The Sixers are coming off yet another failed season, where going into the year, the eventual goal was to win the NBA championship, and although the Sixers did make the playoffs quite comfortably, they weren't able to make it all that close to their eventual goal of winning a championship. And to make matters worse, after this previous season, one of their best players in James Harden officially requested a trade out of Philadelphia, and at this point it seems as if the Sixers are dealing with a lot of different issues going into this next season that they really need to figure out. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Over the past 5 or so seasons, the Sixers were just one of those teams that just consistently made the playoffs each and every year. And not only did they make the playoffs, but they made it pretty comfortably, meaning they were a pretty high seed most of those seasons. And due to that, they had really high expectations of championship or bust. But unfortunately for Philadelphia, although they were able to make it to the playoffs, and some of those years they were able to make it out of the first round, other years they were able to make it out of the second round, it just seemed like at the end of the day, the Sixers were never able to get all that close to their eventual goal of winning an NBA championship. And I talk about a lot of different teams that were in a similar situation to the Sixers on my channel. When you look around the NBA, there were teams like the Utah Jazz a couple years back, even the Houston Rockets a few years back, the OKC Thunder not too long ago. All those teams were in a very similar situation to the Philadelphia 76ers, where they would always consistently make the playoffs, but at the same time, they always came up short of winning an NBA championship. But what do all those teams that I just mentioned have in common? Besides the Sixers, all those teams eventually found out that the team that they were trotting out for all those years just wasn't enough to win an NBA championship, and they eventually decided it was time to move on from their star players and go in the direction of a rebuild. And when you look at some of those teams that I just mentioned, those teams are some of the better younger teams in the NBA, and they also have a ton of draft picks going forward. So clearly their future is pretty bright for all those teams that I mentioned. But when you look at the Philadelphia 76ers, although it has been a good amount of time of them making the playoffs consistently, having high expectations and not meeting those expectations, it still at this point seems as if the Sixers want to compete right now, and they don't want to go in the direction of a rebuild. And in my opinion, at this point, I think it's a mistake. Now, when you look at the roster, obviously they do have a lot of talented players. They have one of the better players in the NBA in Joel Embiid. Of course, at this point, they still have James Harden, who although isn't as good as he used to be, still has a potential to put up 40 points on any given night, and he still is a productive player at this point. Besides those two guys, they have other nice players like Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey, and some others as well. But although I do think that Sixers team is clearly capable of being a top 4 or a top 5 seed basically each and every season in the Eastern Conference, at the end of the day, I don't think it's enough to win a championship. So although I really do like a lot of the different pieces the Sixers have on the roster, at the same time, I do feel as if the Sixers wanted to legitimately compete for an NBA championship, they would need to make significant changes. But when you look at the situation that the Sixers are in, they're not really in the position to make significant changes. They don't really have all that much money to sign significant players in free agency. They don't have all that many trade assets unless they were going to move on from some of their main guys, and they also don't have all that many draft picks to help them that way as well. So I don't really think the Sixers are in a position to make significant changes. And when you talk about a team that's in a situation similar to this, in my opinion at least, I think the best case scenario would be to trade away your main guys and go in the direction of a full rebuild. Because when you talk about the type of talent that the Sixers have on the roster, if they decide to go in the direction of a full rebuild and trade away their main guys, the Sixers can actually get a ton in return and build their future. When you look around the NBA and look at how much the Utah Jazz were able to get in return for a player like Rudy Gobert, just imagine how much the Sixers could get in return for a player like Joel Embiid. They would probably get at least 4 first-round picks unprotected, maybe even more, but alongside with that, they would get a bunch of really nice, talented young players that also have a ton of potential in the long-term future as well. And that's just for one player, that's just for Joel Embiid. Then obviously they would trade away James Harden, who they probably would get at least least 1 or 2 first-round picks, maybe some nice talented players as well, then you would probably move on from Tobias Harris. You'll probably get a couple picks or nice players in that deal as well. They can also move on from other supplementary guys they have on the roster, and maybe they'll be able to get a couple picks in those deals as well. And at the end of the day, if the Sixers were to make all those trades that I just mentioned, they would have a really nice future, because at that point, inevitably, not only would they have a bunch of nice young players they acquired in those deals that would make them a pretty promising team right away, but also at the same time, of course, they would acquire a ton of draft picks. And when you talk about the Sixers organization, they are an organization that I am somewhat confident in their drafting abilities, and if they have a ton of picks going forward, that just gives you a ton of chances to be right, basically. And at the same time, if the Sixers, after going in the direction of a rebuild, somehow got a little bit better than people expected quicker, then the Sixers would have a ton of draft picks to trade away in order to bring in some nice players, whether you talk about all-stars or superstars, or even bring in some nice talented players that can make them a better team right away at that point. So I just think there's a ton of different benefits of going in the direction of a rebuild for the Sixers, especially at this point after coming up short of winning an NBA championship season after season. But I do think one of the most important things that a rebuild would bring to the Sixers organization would be flexibility, because when you look at their team at this point, as I mentioned, they don't have all that much money in free agency, they don't have all that many trade pieces, they don't have all that many draft picks, and they're just in a really tough spot to make significant changes to the roster and really improve to become a true championship contender, at least in my mind. But even if the Sixers do go in the direction of a full rebuild, the Sixers cannot, and I mean cannot, trade away Tyrese Maxey, and I wouldn't expect them to either, just due to the fact that Maxey has proven in his short time in the NBA that he's an extremely talented young player. And the most important part about that is he's still a very young player. So even if the Sixers did go in the direction of a full rebuild, Tyrese would be in a similar age group to a lot of those other players they bring in right away, and even in a similar age group to some of the players that they do eventually end up drafting, of course, if they went in that direction of a full rebuild. But as I mentioned, even if the Sixers do go in that direction, I don't expect them to trade away Tyrese Maxey whatsoever. I think they realize and recognize how good this player is and how young he is and how much potential he does have in the long-term future as well. But of course, at the end of the day, the Sixers really haven't shown all that much interest in going in the direction of a full rebuild, so I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with that. But if the Sixers do decide to keep the roster that they do have, maybe they decide to trade away James Harden, but they go in the direction of bringing in another star in exchange for him and put that player alongside with Embiid, I do think the Sixers still have a chance to have success. They're probably going to be a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, and of course they're going to make the playoffs, and I do expect them to make it out of the first round, but going forward from there, I just don't have that high of expectations for them. It just seems like they're in the same situation each and every season, and they're never able to make it over that goal of winning an NBA championship. So going forward from here, unless they made really significant changes to the roster, I just don't see them winning an NBA championship. But as I said before, I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with that as well. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think it's time for the Sixers to go in the direction of a full rebuild, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.